The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, and help me welcome Doris Hohensee and Howard Coffman from the Board of Education. We listened last night to a presentation on where a new school's going to be put up for the junior high. And, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your perspective on what's happening with that whole project?
Well, we voted a year and a half ago as a board to send it to the JSSBC, Joint Special School Building Committee. And I asked 3 times, are they going to bring it back to us for approval? This is just for them to review and refine and bring it back to us. They dodged the answer to that question. They told us if we don't, the whole project will die. So we sent it over to them, not knowing any better. And now it looks like they don't want to send it back. They just want our input. State law, RSA 199.3 says we approve it. So it should come back to us. I want the board to have public hearings. I want the abutters, the parents, the residents to have a voice.
The teachers.
Everyone, yes. Even the custodians, yes.
Yeah, that should be. Didn't they say they had some meetings of that?
I haven't heard that there were no public meetings that I saw, no minutes, no public invite that I know of. But it's got to be that dialogue with the community because I'm feeling like it's being rushed.
Yeah.
Last night, you were there, and they were asking for feasibility studies, and they were suggesting that we have to decide on the location, and then we'll do how feasible it is.
Well, actually, what I heard was that what they're doing now is the feasibility study, but there are lots of loose ends that have not yet been discussed, but yet, as Doris said, they want to push it forward. There's lots of loose ends. They're trying to say, oh yeah, well here's the best one I think, folks, is the where they want it to access the property. I guess it's from Buck Meadow Road or Drive into the site that the city owns. They don't own that strip of land, so it's privately owned by somebody, and the city does not own it. But they're ready to build in the spring without controlling or having a right of way or an easement or whatever to get into the property. And how Mr. Dowd can somehow say, oh, we'll deal with that later is beyond comprehension.
Well, one thing that surprised me in the whole meeting there, the only discussion had to do with the building, the location, not with whether the school was designed to the desired level by its utility, as far as I can see. Is that something who's decided on that?
Well, they decided on equity, 800 per school, because they now have 1,000 and
it's 1093 in Elm Street. Was it 695 in Fairgrounds and 640 or so in Pennachuck?
That was the littlest one.
Well, that's just the enrollments. They all have capability of up to 800 or so.
Yeah, so
they're just not at capacity.
So they want to even it out. So they're going to add something to Fairgrounds. They're going to add something to Pennachuck plus a library and decrease what they have at Elm Street. But why? They haven't considered any other permutations, like maybe we reduce, because Elm Street is a small piece of land, reduce it to smaller than 800 and add a few more to the other schools that have the extensive land and fields and use those classrooms that are 800 square feet and grandfathered in to match. They want to make them bigger to be 900 square feet so they're up to code or what the state regulation.
Education space requirements.
But if you're putting special ed in there, there's less than a full classroom. There's different requirements. Can't we work something out so that we don't, maybe the renovation isn't as expensive?
Do you have any Board of Education members on that building committee?
5.
They put a quorum of the Board of Ed on that committee, which
we don't do that for negotiations.
Don't they come back and report to you what's happening?
It's been a year and a half.
Nothing substantial. So one of the things, we attended a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they're voting, and Mr. Mosier's on the phone, and whenever he's on the phone, law requires a roll call vote if someone attends remotely. So they didn't require a roll call vote for Mr. Mosier. So I went back and checked, and they didn't require a roll call vote 34 times at 9 different meetings. And that's why last night in that meeting, Mr. Dowd had a vote to accept all the previous motions because they knew they were out of sync with the law and did that to correct it. So they're lawless even there. And
But what bothers, I think, me as a resident is that the Board of Education isn't being kept up on all
No.
no, they have the quorum in that meeting.
and
And
independent, though.
No.
I mean, they're dependent upon your approval.
But they
the
have
law
5.
says we are.
They have the 5, so they know if we go back to the board, they will have the
They always
vote.
have the vote.
We never send 5 people in on negotiations for just that reason. They have to they have to come back and we have the discussion. They think they own the board because they have 5. And here's just one regulation. I pulled down the state regulations because they don't seem to be following. The maximum size for school buildings in middle schools is 140 square feet per pupil. If you look at the square feet they're proposing per pupil, for the new elementary school, it's 240 square feet, not 140. For fairgrounds, they're looking somewhere around 154. That's closer.
Which is even less than what they have now.
Yeah, and then 156 for Pennachuck. But 140 is the maximum size that the state will reimburse. So what are we building here? And, you know, they're saying, well, now there's extra space for stairways. Well, those 2 schools don't have it. The new school might have staircases, but they don't break it out. So how do we know?
And they're building the corridors and the widths of the staircases to accommodate not only the, quote, 800 they want to put in there, but future expansion.
Also,
So-
they expect the charter schools.
Oh, this is
The
the fun one.
superintendent said last night, because once we get this new building, the students from the charter schools and the private schools will come back the way they did for the high school. There were no charter schools when those high schools were built.
Yeah.
So I don't know why he thinks that he's going to get an influx of homeschoolers, charter school students. I mean,
Did
Oh.
he say why they come back?
They have not conducted an enrollment analysis, which is required by law.
well, right here it says ED 32107, design standards. For the purpose of standards for school sites and construction projects for school buildings, design capacity shall be based on reasonable enrollment projections developed through a statistically valid process.
So if you
There's
look
no
at
report.
the current strategic plan has no enrollment analysis in it. I asked 100 times. Now, I reached out to George Farrington today for a copy of the old strategic plan because I recall it actually had an analysis of enrollment that was
Oh, really?
it was right on the nose. I mean, they were in units of accuracy. But this administration, they just pulled the number out of their hat and said, oh, build to 800 in each building. Then we had talked about Hollowell, even go back to Mr. Hollowell and George and the previous board, where we have a lot of expense in out-of-district tuition expenses around special ed, $6 million a year. So what if we could transform some of that $6 million into revenue that other districts would pay us by expanding our own programs? So one of the proposals, which they didn't even talk about last night, is to build, what is it, a ground floor level, sort of not a basement, but it's ground level, and something on top of it to house a whole SPED complex, only for middle schoolers. They say, oh, we're building it out for 60 young people.
But they don't know which disabilities or what space is required for those disabilities.
And Mr. Donovan tells us the night before, oh, well, I haven't yet gotten to the point of identifying what rooms we would have and things like that based upon our own 100 kids that use those services.
And the other thing is,
But they're building it. They're
it's
going to
not-
do it for 60.
it's not K-12.
Yeah,
So
that's the
sometimes when you
problem.
put the kids out of district, they get attached to the facility and the teachers and form relationships. They're not going to want
not
to
gonna
come back for 3 years and then go back for high school unless we have the full spectrum. we may not get those students back at all.
And we
So-
need to provide them the consistency K through 12, and that's also cost containment for us. So that, and when the finance committee, I was on for my first 2 years, I'm on it now for my last year, but they, that committee said, oh, let's examine bringing the administrative space into, because we were looking at, it's really complicated, okay?
Yeah.
We have something we call the Brentwood facility, which is, right now it's costing us about $13,000 a month,
Plus utilities.
plus utilities, in a very nice office building right near the market basket at Exit 8. And, but that's an expense that's gone. I mean, rent is gone, right?
So we wanted to bring
So
that
we wanted
in.
to bring that in-house.
That
So,
was part of the original plan.
and the
Just got
idea,
lost.
right, we bring, and we call that Brentwood. So we bring that Brentwood program into the administrative office building, which is right around 10,000 square feet. And we move the administration building into what was then the Elm Street renovation. And the original plans that were done were where they built a whole wing almost just for the district administrative offices. That's completely left out of this new building proposal. So,
What happens to them?
Nothing. Nothing.
no, they would stay, Brentwood would stay, these costs would
So we're
continue
bleeding
forever.
that money permanently instead of resolving the issue.
And the strategic plan doesn't address that either. Just a minor omission.
Well, with this big amount of money, you'd think you'd wait for all the details to be decided on before you go and
It would be helpful.
They're on a fast track.
what's in push just to get something through?
It's a good question, Carl. I don't really know.
I don't know.
Why is there this struggle between the JSSBC and the board? We should be approving all design and plans. And if they change them in the mid-process, the board should be, they're building, we are approving plans to meet our needs.
Right.
So I don't understand why this tug of war.
You're gonna be the
I-
user, you should have it built to your requirement.
I think part of the reason why they're pushing it so fast is they have a board majority.
And they might
Dot-
not. But they're gonna
Rick
have to
Dowd
get something.
has it. Rick Dowd kind of kidnapped this whole project from the board, as Doris
But I
mentioned
mean,
earlier.
Yes.
Even if they don't get what they want, other than all we're saying is, well, get this all out of the way and make a commitment and then live with it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and we'll figure out the details later. But once you get past this, once you commit to breaking ground, you're stuck there. And like I said earlier, if you don't own act, you don't have the ability to ride in there. Really? What are you doing?
They
That's
should
crazy.
be talking to the board about what a letter of intent or something about that easement. We have seen no evidence that there even is an easement. Does that mean it's all going to go back through Cherrywood where the emergency entrance is? And as parents pointed out last night, instead of going on the queue and going in the main entrance, if you get that easement to Buck Meadow, many parents are going to go to the side emergency exit and just drop their kids off and run because it's going to be less traffic until it builds up.
And then the irony is if the kids walk in that way, they have to literally walk all around the building because there's only going to be two entrances, one for the bus and then one for the drop-off. And the entrance at I guess it's the south end here, they'd have to literally walk around the whole thing to get into the building. And I said, well, would you put another entrance at that end of the building? And it was a flat out no. So,
Well, I still, I guess my biggest problem is how we can go ahead with a multi-million-dollar program,
120 million.
120,
3 renovations
all
simultaneously.
of it together. Okay, so then I guess they've dropped any kind of talk about doing it sequentially.
So no, they would start work at the new school site
Yeah,
this spring,
right.
and then next year they would start the
They would try to
two
do as
middle
much during
schools,
holidays and over the summer.
vacations and
Well,
So
that's on
not
the
be
current
disruptive.
schools, yeah.
yeah.
Right. The other one, it wouldn't be any restrictions.
So it'd take a couple of years to do all the additions.
They're saying 2 years.
They say 2 years, 2 years to do each renovation and 2 years to build new.
Okay, so would they be doing 2 renovations in parallel?
Depends what
Yes.
they're bonding. I thought they're bonding.
Well, it's also dependent on money.
Well, the bonding, from what I understand, is done when you get a bill.
Right.
Okay? So they give you authority to bond out to a certain level, and they'll do it in segments
As
the
they
bills
expend
come
it,
in,
right.
basically.
So
And they get that so that they don't have to pay interest on something that has money just sitting in there.
oh,
Right.
they haven't borrowed it yet, so they don't have to pay
Right.
for it.
Okay.
So last night I made a list. This was the list I made
Right.
last night from the comments that the public that were there. One of the issues is student transportation costs.
Right.
So right now you have a downtown school.
Right.
All those kids are going to have to be bused to the new building.
Right.
No analysis. It costs us $55,000 a bus when we need
Per
one.
year.
Per year. So we don't know what the increased transportation costs would be. That's really important to the board
Oh, yeah.
because we have to pay for that by law, number one. And number two, it's part of the operating budget. So if we have to commit that transportation cost in the operating budget, well, we won't be able to buy books, because we have to pay for the lights and everything else out of there.
Well, when you have a new
school.
you're going to have to buy books.
Well, that they say that's part of. Well, the furniture is part of the cost, but I would think all the books they're not going to pay for as part of a capital expense. So
They'd have
we'd
to be boxed and moved. Yeah.
yeah. The other thing is, by virtue of changing the face of the three middle schools by taking one away from downtown, you have to redistrict. So, and they want to deal with that in the future.
Again,
Really? You're going to put off something that major for the future?
one of the
I am. I left mine in the car. There's no population study of demographics in the city. There's no enrollment study. The current strategic plan doesn't have one. The whole thing about the special ed analysis that Doris was just talking about. We don't have access to the location. We don't own land to get into it.
And they didn't break out the net use space and the gross space because we've got this new one with 70,000 square
Extra.
feet extra, which doesn't make it equitable. Why are they all, the two of them are the same and then there's one gigantic new building? They're not breaking it out, so I'm not even seeing it as equitable.
And all of it is stairways and it doesn't make sense. And we've been asking about that. There are a lot of loose ends.
Have they decided yet when the next meeting is going to be?
So I would say, well, not to us. The JSSBC has been meeting pretty much every 2
week.
weeks.
Every week lately.
He's on a fast track every week or every 2 weeks. And the Board of Ed, we have a non-public meeting on Monday, but no other than committee meetings. The next board meeting is November 20th. So will there be a special meeting between now and then to talk about this? I would expect so.
There needs to be a public hearing.
And there needs to be a public
And we should
hearing.
go to each of the buildings so it's easy for parents
Right.
and get the feedback
Right.
and then process that information. I don't see us ready for a determination without a lot of information that's missing.
And there's a whole nother thing. If Alderman Dowd pushes this, accelerates this to try and get approval by the end of the year because he has the board majority, the BOE and the aldermanic board, I imagine. The problem is on the school board, there are 5 people up for election. So there'll be a new majority, or at least a newly composed majority at the school board, also at the aldermanic board. But yet the lame ducks are going to decide a $120 million expense and lock in the new elected officials. That is totally wrong. That should never happen. The new boards should put their representatives on the committee, and that newly assembled board should be the entity that makes the decisions go.
Well,
so they have to live with it for 4 years. They have to pay those bills every month.
Traffic study, they're not saying, is it feasible or not? They're saying, we'll do the traffic studies and then widen whatever roads we need to. In other words, we're not seeing if it's feasible. We'll just spend more money and make it feasible. That has to fit with the new Board of Public Works budget.
And that has to,
Traffic down there in that area is going to be.
November 6th, they're voting on a new building next to the dump for all the public works. Remember they were going to put it over on
Burke
Arlington Street in Brooks? Well, that wasn't suitable. They bought the building and they couldn't maneuver the trucks in. So now they're going to build a whole new building and they're voting on the day after the election.
Really?
Yes. And then we may have a new board over there. So it's like,
So the lame ducks are I don't know if ducks roost, but whatever they're doing over there,
They're swimming in the water.
they're swimming in the water. And it's really irresponsible to
Yes.
accelerate. There's so many loose ends. They've carved out and taken
Especially where
away.
the education part is a key element of it.
Yeah.
It's being ignored.
Well, and the whole section, Doris brought a copy of the big report,
this is the report that we were given within the last week.
No, boy.
700
So-
pages
It's
or plus.
it's not comprehensive because there's
Show it to
many.
the camera there.
There's
It's online. It's available on the
Yes.
website.
Okay.
There is a specific link on the right-hand side of the page to this and associated documents. They've got that up this last week.
because we insisted that the public needs to be able to get this information. It's not, I mean, it's not just for us, it's for them. And they may come up with insights that we don't realize. That's why the public hearings are essential, but they won't be effective if they don't have the starting material
Right.
to digest.
One of the things we did not talk about last night is there's a whole section in there on programming.
Yeah.
And what they mean by that is how many classrooms are delegated to general education, and they break it out, how many math classes, how many science, how many English, all that stuff is broken out. And then how many for special ed, how many students, but they didn't associate the square footage. So, and apparently different special ed needs require different space requirements. But we don't know what they are yet, so we can't calculate, but it's going to cost you $5 million, $4.8 million to build that SPED complex. We know how much it's going to cost, but we really don't know how many kids are going to be there
Or
and
what
what
their
they
needs
really
are.
need, but we know we're going to do it for 60 and it's going to be here and it's going to cost you
Well, it's
$4
like
million.
Elm Street. They have 48 regular classrooms now, and they're going down to 32 or 33. Well, how does that break out? It's well, because they're bigger, so they'll have 100 extra square feet per classroom. So now you don't need so many of them. So what does that mean? Our class sizes are going to increase?
That's what it says.
Let's get into the nitty gritty. This is important information.
This proposal says nothing about staff impact. It doesn't say, well, how many teachers, if I'm going to go 250 kids less from Elm and spread them out, okay, it's 25, that's at least 10 teachers, maybe more. Are they being redistributed? Will they be a reduction in force for those teachers? Because the shift is going to be to special ed teachers at this, and we don't know, but we have to know that for budget planning
And all
process.
this is on top of what the new
Strategic plans with a
Yeah,
5
it's not in
million.
there. There's no mention of a new high school, a new middle school in the strategic plan.
All right.
The idea of a SPED complex, if I want to even call it that, is in year 5 of the strategic plan, which meant he didn't want to talk about it. But now all of a sudden, secret to us, they threw in the plans for this underground thing
Yeah.
and had it quoted separately at $4.8 million. Not mention the strategic plan that we're going to look at it for 5 years, but behind the scenes, they're busy planning it for 60 people of unknown needs. It's really bizarre.
And the teachers.
And you only find out, sorry, Doris.
You've got the teams of teachers that will be split up at the various, because they don't need 1,000 teachers in one school, it's only 800. So some of them are going to be distributed elsewhere, breaking up the existing teams. So
Oh, that's true.
it is very disruptive to the whole community. So we need to know what we're doing before we jump.
And what about parents who choose, parents have no choice if kids are going to be on a bus or if they're going to be able to walk.
We talked about the administration. How many people are in the administrative office? And what
I think there's about 100 total all over the place. In the administrative office, well, figure 4 corridors, 20 in a corridor, something like that. Maybe the building itself, right?
Well, yeah, how many is in that?
I would say maybe 80 to 100.
100.
They have about 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
That building is 8 or
But do you know
10,000.
what their functions are? What their
Well, some of them are distributed, like IT is in South,
South.
even though it's for the whole district.
okay.
So at some point, maybe they want to put them all together.
The special ed director is in there. The ELL, student services, is in there.
Human resources,
HR is there.
transportation.
All together, they'd be better communication, especially
Yes.
for a project like this.
Yes.
I mean,
Oh, Plant Ops is in its own world. You know, they have their own. They literally have their own building.
where's that?
I don't know. Honestly, do you know where?
No, but we're out of all buildings now. We
You know, our key codes don't work anymore.
Oh,
Didn't we
really?
tell you?
can't get into buildings
Dr. Mosley, 6 months after he arrived, just turned them off.
Did he say
without any advance
No,
notice.
no notice, no reason. The only way we
It's
found out was Miss Van
security.
Twyver couldn't get into the building. So it does work at North because that's where we go for our meetings, but it doesn't work at any of the other schools.
Or
And
central
access to
office.
the schools as a school board member is near impossible. If I were to walk in on a school saying, gee, I'd love to observe a class, all hell would break loose.
We did that.
Oh,
we went into
we
Pennachuck
made an appointment.
to reschedule an existing appointment, just to reschedule, not to do anything. And we shouldn't have even gone in there.
And when we did come back later in the week, we had a
Chaperones.
chaperone by one of the assistant superintendents. She walked around with us wherever we went, interjected herself into the conversation like she was invited, which she wasn't. And we were, it felt like a communist minder, just being observed for what
You
you'd
don't
say.
get candid responses from staff if you've got their supervisors in on the conversation.
Have you heard anything from the teachers and how they feel about this whole arrangement?
No, well, there's been other things. We've been trying to follow what's going on with Elm Street when we lost two
As
administrators.
far as the new building goes,
Yeah.
no feedback at all. No. Teachers Union's been completely quiet.
Well, they made a list today of what they want in it, what they want in the various buildings. We got that today.
Oh, okay. I've been
but
busy
we
all
need
day.
to have, as a board, go and have hearings in each of the buildings and listen to parents.
Sure.
The community members that did show up last night were very engaged. They were very vocal. They were very concerned about what's going on, and they felt as though a decision has been made and they really aren't listening. And I can say, as a board member, it feels as though a decision has been made and they're not listening. That JSSB committee. It's really unfortunate.
As a member of the board, can you get together to hear things from without the whole board being there?
Well, it wouldn't be a meeting of the board.
No, you wouldn't have to. Just say
We'd have to get permission from the superintendent to go into a building,
You don't have to go
unless
to the
we
building.
meet in a library,
Yeah.
publicize it on our own. They have access to send it to the parents.
They can invite everybody by email. We would never have that ability to do that. We'd never be able to get the notice out to all the kids to give to the parents. We don't have any access to reach parents
for
on our own.
communication.
You don't have any.
No,
Well, what if we put it in the newspaper or something?
it's possible.
Well, it's something to certainly consider. We could
So
do
we
it in
should-
parallel.
Audience, if you're interested in getting some feedback and having your input for this new building and everything, call Doris and Howard and your
Call Superintendent Mosley. Let him know.
Call him too.
Ask, but I would send it to him in an email to the entire board, so it becomes public record. Otherwise, we would probably not
Never
learn
know
about
that it happened. It's just
Okay.
BOE@nashua.edu is the email. Board of Education, BOE.
But it is a public document when you send it to us there.
Right. So if you want a hearing, if you want a public hearing at your school, so that everybody can have some input on what changes, because it's going to be what changes are going to happen at Pennachuck. So those are different concerns than what's going to happen at Fairgrounds. So there
And Elm
should be-
Street will just go away.
but we should have a hearing. What do they feel about it?
right.
They'll lose access to that theater. They said it was like $4 million to replace, and they couldn't do it in triplicate for equity, so that's going to be left behind. So the plays are now going to be at the back of the gymnasium on a stage with folding chairs.
Ah.
So for Elm Street, that's a big difference.
Yeah.
They have such a gorgeous theater,
Well, plus they have a big band room and chorus room behind the stage.
right? So
When I
they're-
substitute taught, I covered those classes a lot.
Will they ever be able to use the high schools in place?
well, I know we rent it out. I'm sure that the symphony is going to need it.
Yeah.
So it'll be maintained in some capacity, but now it's a transportation issue to get there to use it.
You know, it was really interesting. The design of the building says the upper floor and one half is for public use when there's no school in session.
Right.
And certainly at night, you could use a gym for a lot of different reasons. But the outdoor spaces, Mr. Dowd said that there'd be no lights. Therefore, they wouldn't be used at night. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't be used on a weekend,
Right.
which members of the community who came last night were concerned.
They're concerned about sound and light infiltrating their neighborhood, because if you, like, there's a tennis court near me at a park, so those lights are on all the time. You can see them at some points of the year in other parts. So they want to know what the impact will be to their homes.
Their quality of life.
Right.
Because one of the people was saying, we bought here because we really liked it was away from town. It was quiet. We had the conservation land that no one was going to build on. And now all of a sudden, several years later, oh, you're going to bring 800 kids here and buses and, full athletic fields, tennis courts, the whole baseball field, tennis court, the whole thing. That's not what they bought into. So, and the real question is this going to be a plus or a minus for the property values? We don't know the answer to that. My suggestion to some of them last night was contact several realtors, ask them the question, have the realtors, professionals, come back to the board at a meeting and say, this is going to positively or negatively impact those home values.
Do you have
We don't know.
easements marked out on your maps? Because that'll show how much
There's
that
no,
can be taken from their property.
oh, I don't know. We just have a 20-acre lot, and it's interior lot behind Cherrywood, and it has an access to Cherrywood.
Yeah.
It was given by the developer of Cherrywood and the area around, and it's deeded for a school.
Yeah, but a lot of times the public the town has an easement on a road so that they can expand it. Like,
10 feet or something.
well, usually it's just for sidewalks or something
Right.
that. But sometimes, I know when I was in Texas, there was about a 40-foot easement.
Oh, gosh.
And I found out about it when I looked at it, looked and found out all the characteristics of the land around it. I said, well, I'm not going to move there. I'm going to move over here where I
Yeah.
don't have a 40-foot easement in there, because that meant a 4-lane highway
Right.
going through.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The information that was given to us doesn't show any easements. We looked online through the property system that the city has, and it shows the lots, but it doesn't show the easements.
No. And they're talking about sidewalks in that area. So they may add those and expanding, making extra turning lanes and different things like that. So,
But that should all be decided up front. That should all be decided up front. And again, they were kicking it down the road to be done. Oh, we'll get to that when we need to know about it.
You have to get
No,
to
you
that
need it.
before you need to-
So folks, they're looking at making, personally, do I think it's probably a good idea to get a new middle school? I'm going to say yes. And it's not about building a building.
Yeah.
It's about making sure the process of building a building is really thoroughly vetted
Right.
and well documented so you know what you're getting into.
Good planning means good experience, I think.
Right, yeah. The feasibility study says you look at all aspects of the project beforehand and you develop contingencies and alternate plans, and you know what you're getting into, and you look at everything. You look at everything. That you don't say we'll look at that. Oh, we'll get access later to the land. It's just that's one. That's my favorite one for this project
Well,
right now.
we'll have to have you back again.
Oh, we always like coming.
And see what the next story is in this. That's
The saga.
the saga.
The saga.
Okay, but I will be having the superintendent on. He made that commitment to me
good.
last night, and we'll see what he has to say.
Do you know when that's going to be?
Not yet. We're trying to find a common date.
Yeah,
but he
that's always
said
tough.
he'd try to do it next week.
Oh, good.
So
That's good.
we'll see what happens.
okay.
Okay. Well,
Thank you
Well,
very
thanks
much.
for seeing you again, Chloe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.